Yeah, welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for coming around this week. Um, Last week we considered the Eucharist and we considered the definition of Eucharist, of Sacrament, and Ordinance. We also considered the four different ways the Eucharist has been practiced by earlier Christians. This week, what we're going to do is to talk about how the Eucharist found its root in the Old Testament, and of course, the fact that it was also practiced by Jesus Christ and how Jesus Christ established the practice of it, and of course, how the apostles and the apostolic fathers continued it much later. Before I go right into my teaching, kindly do something for me. Try and subscribe so that you can always see my videos and try and interact. If you have questions, drop it at the comment section. And of course, try and like this video. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For those of you that have done this and for those of you that will do it, I'm counting on you. Thank you so much. So this week, we'll be considering the Eucharist again. This is the part 2 video. And our focus is this practice. Does it have a root in the Old Testament? Usually, some of the standards for building a doctrine, we say that it must have a root in the Old Testament. It must be established in the New Testament, of course. I must say that it is continued by the apostles and the apostolic fathers. So, generally, the important rules, important doctrines of the Bible tends to span the Bible, span from Old Testament to the New Testament. Now, it might be in form of practices or principle in the Old Testament, but we see the clear definition of it in the New Testament. So, like every other important doctrine, the Eucharist also has its root in the Old Testament. You remember when the Israelites were clamoring that they want to leave the land of Egypt, and they were praying to God. God sent them a deliverer, and they tried all the means to deliver themselves. They could not deliver themselves, and God began to bring plague over the land of Egypt. And the last thing that they did was the fact that they brought a Passover lamb and marked the lintel of their houses, and that day God delivered them from Egypt. That practice, that was the origin of it, and it continued until the time of Jesus Christ, and that's what the Israelite call the Passover. So, and Jesus also marked the Passover, but on the very last Passover that he marked before he died, he told them the meaning and showed them that the Passover they've always been talking about. When Jesus stood up, he picked up the bread and broke it and said, "This is my body." Now, this is actually the Passover. And he says, "This is my body." He was saying that, yes, you had the Passover. You had the bread, you had the meat, but that was prophetic of me coming to die to save my people. Now, in the first instance, in the first appearance in the Old Testament, God used the Passover to save Israel, his people. In the New Testament, Jesus is the Passover that saved God's people, the Christians. Remember that the Israelites, they call the Prince of God. The same way, and that is a type of believers, that is a type of Christians. The same way, the Passover is a type of the body and the blood of Jesus Christ. So, on the last day, Jesus Christ stood up and said, "This is my body, broken for you." And he picked up the cup and said, "This is my blood. This wine represents my blood, shed for you." And he said, as often as you practice this, you announce my death and burial. And Jesus practiced it. And now the apostles also continued. You see that in the book of 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul gave rules that guides the practice of it. And of course, the apostolic fathers, for example, Ignatius wrote extensively on how to go about the Eucharist, or what is called the communion. Some people call it the Holy Communion. Yeah. So, but the essence of it is, in principle and doctrine, is the fact that Eucharist is important because Jesus died for us. Eucharist is important because it is made to communicate for us what Jesus did for us. The fact that Jesus died for us, his body was broken for us, and his blood was shed for us, and a symbol of the New Testament. So the power is not in the bread, the power is not in the wine, the power is in what it communicates. And what it communicates redemption. It communicates the fact that Jesus died for us, and his death meant the payment for our sins. So that's how it was established in the Bible, and that's how it was practiced.